There is a pattern that shows up so often in relationship psychology that researchers gave it its own name. And once you learn it, you will start seeing it everywhere. In your own dating history, in your friends' relationships, possibly in your parents' marriage. It is called the anxious-avoidant trap, and it describes one of the most common, most painful, and most predictable dynamics two people can fall into together. If you've ever found yourself in a relationship where one person seems to constantly need reassurance, and the other seems to constantly need space, and the whole thing feels like a push and pull that never quite resolves, you've lived this pattern whether or not you had a name for it. Today we're breaking down exactly why these two types keep finding each other, why the dynamic feels so intensely magnetic despite being so painful, and what it actually takes to break the cycle. Let's start with the two attachment styles at the center of this, because understanding them individually is what makes the combination make sense. Anxious attachment typically develops in childhood environments where caregiving was inconsistent rather than absent. A parent who was warm and attentive sometimes, but unpredictably distracted, stressed, or emotionally unavailable at other times. With no clear pattern the child could learn to anticipate. A child raised in this environment learns something specific. Love is available, but you have to stay vigilant to get it, because it can disappear without warning, and for reasons you can't always identify. This creates an adult who is highly attuned to a partner's emotional state, quick to notice small shifts in tone or availability, and prone to seeking reassurance frequently, because reassurance is the mechanism that historically brought the inconsistent caregiver back into range. Avoidant attachment, which we've covered in more depth in another video, develops from a different but related environment. One where emotional needs were met with subtle discomfort or dismissal rather than warmth, teaching the child that the safest strategy is to need less and rely on themselves rather than risk disappointment by depending on someone else. The adult that develops from this environment becomes highly self-sufficient, uncomfortable with emotional intensity or dependence, and prone to creating distance specifically when a relationship starts to require real emotional reliance. Now here is where it gets interesting, and where most people's confusion actually starts. If you asked either type, in isolation, what they wanted in a partner, most anxious individuals would describe wanting someone calm, secure, and consistent. Most avoidant individuals would describe wanting someone who gives them space and doesn't demand too much emotionally. On paper, neither type should be drawn specifically toward the other because the other type's core behavior is exactly what they claim to find stressful. And yet, across an enormous body of relationship research and an even larger body of lived experience, anxious and avoidant individuals pair up with each other far more often than either pairs up with someone securely attached. Understanding why requires looking past what people say they want and toward what actually feels familiar to their nervous system. Here is the mechanism. An anxious person's nervous system is calibrated around a specific emotional experience. Love that requires effort and vigilance to maintain. When they meet someone consistently warm and available, someone securely attached, that relationship can genuinely feel understimulating. Not because it lacks value, but because it doesn't require the vigilance their nervous system has been trained to associate with real emotional investment. There is no chase, so on some unconscious level, it can register as less significant. When that same anxious person meets an avoidant partner, someone whose availability is inconsistent, who pulls back periodically and requires effort to draw closer, their nervous system recognizes this as intensely, powerfully familiar. It matches the emotional environment they grew up navigating. The chase itself, uncomfortable as it is, gets misread as the feeling of falling in love, because activation and love have never been clearly distinguished in their emotional education. Meanwhile, the avoidant person's nervous system is calibrated around a different familiar experience. Emotional self-sufficiency, discomfort with dependence, and relief when a partner doesn't require too much direct emotional engagement. A securely attached partner who communicates needs clearly and expects consistent engagement in return can feel, to an avoidant nervous system, subtly demanding, even when the actual requests are entirely reasonable. An anxious partner, by contrast, often overfunctions in the relationship, managing the emotional labor, initiating the difficult conversations, tolerating long stretches of distance without directly confronting it, at least at first. This can feel, to the avoidant partner, like exactly the kind of low-demand dynamic that feels safe, at least in the early stages, before the anxious partner's need for reassurance inevitably grows in response to the avoidant partner's distance. This is where the actual trap closes, and it closes in a self-reinforcing loop that neither person consciously chooses. The anxious partner, sensing distance, seeks reassurance, more texts, more questions about where things stand, more visible emotional need. To the avoidant partner, this increased need reads as exactly the engulfment their nervous system was built to protect against. So they withdraw further to regain a sense of space. This withdrawal, to the anxious partner, confirms their deepest fear that love is once again slipping away unpredictably, so they escalate further to try to regain security. And so the loop tightens, each person's coping mechanism directly triggering the others, both of them experiencing genuine, real pain, while also each, in their own way, keeping the dynamic exactly as familiar and unconsciously recognizable as it has always been. What makes this so difficult to escape, rather than just uncomfortable, is that the relationship often produces genuinely intense feelings that get interpreted as unusually deep love. The anxious partner experiences relief and euphoria whenever the avoidant partner does re-engage, a rush of relief so strong it can feel like nothing else compares to it. And that intensity gets stored as evidence of a uniquely powerful connection. The avoidant partner, meanwhile, experiences real affection during the calmer periods and often does feel genuinely attached, even while structurally unable to provide the consistency the relationship actually needs. Both people are frequently telling the truth when they say they love each other. The problem isn't the absence of feeling. It is that the specific combination of their attachment patterns creates a dynamic that generates enormous emotional intensity while remaining structurally unstable. And it takes real, deliberate work from at least one, usually both, people to change that structure rather than simply riding the intensity indefinitely. So can this combination actually work? The honest answer is yes, but only with a specific kind of effort that most people in this dynamic never actually apply, because the intensity of the pattern itself often feels like passion, which makes it hard to recognize as something that needs fixing rather than something to simply endure. For the relationship to become stable rather than cyclically painful, both partners typically need to do work that runs somewhat against their instinctive coping mechanism. For the anxious partner, this means learning to self-soothe during periods of a partner's distance rather than immediately escalating for reassurance. This is genuinely difficult because the urge to seek reassurance during anxiety is not a character flaw. It is a deeply conditioned response to perceived threat. But learning to tolerate uncertainty without immediately needing it resolved, through practices like delaying the urge to text for reassurance, building a support system outside the relationship, so the entire burden of emotional regulation doesn't rest on one partner, and learning to distinguish genuine red flags from normal, healthy space, is what actually breaks the escalation half of the cycle. For the avoidant partner, this means learning to stay present and communicative, specifically during moments when the instinct is to withdraw, rather than disappearing and letting the anxious partner's imagination fill the silence with worst-case scenarios. A small, deliberate act, sending a brief message even during a period of needing space, saying something as simple as, "I need some time to recharge, but this isn't about you and I'll be back in touch soon," can completely change how the anxious partner experiences the withdrawal, transforming it from an unexplained absence that triggers panic into a communicated boundary that can actually be trusted. There is an important nuance worth adding here, because this cycle doesn't only appear in romantic relationships, and recognizing it in other contexts can actually make it easier to spot in your own love life. The same pattern shows up in friendships, in family relationships, sometimes even in professional dynamics. Anywhere one person's coping mechanism for closeness is escalation, and another person's is retreat. Once you can see the shape of the cycle clearly in a lower stakes relationship, a friend who always seems to need more reassurance than you are able to give, a family member whose distance you've learned to interpret correctly rather than personally, it becomes considerably easier to recognize the exact same architecture in a romantic partner, because the underlying mechanism doesn't change based on the type of relationship it shows up in. I also want to address a common misconception directly because it causes real harm when it goes unexamined. There is a version of pop psychology advice that essentially tells anxious partners to simply become more avoidant themselves, to play it cool, create artificial distance, and manufacture indifference in order to become more attractive to an avoidant partner. This advice is not just unhelpful, it is actively counterproductive, because it treats the entire dynamic as a game to be won through strategic behavior, rather than as two nervous systems that need real trust built between them. Manufacturing distance you don't actually feel doesn't teach an avoidant partner that closeness is safe. It simply removes the anxious partner's own honesty from the relationship, replacing a genuine, if difficult, attachment style with a performance, which tends to produce short-term interest but rarely produces the kind of deep, resilient trust that actually resolves the underlying cycle. The goal is not to become someone you are not in order to manage someone else's nervous system. The goal is to become more securely regulated yourself so that your own responses stop feeding the cycle, regardless of what the other person does. It is also worth being honest about the timeline here, because this kind of change is genuinely slow, and expecting it to happen quickly sets both partners up to give up right when real progress might otherwise be possible. Attachment patterns took years, often decades to form, and while they can absolutely shift within an adult relationship, that shift tends to happen gradually through hundreds of small repeated experiences rather than through a single breakthrough conversation. A single instance of an avoidant partner staying present during a moment of closeness, or a single instance of an anxious partner not escalating during a period of distance, will not undo years of conditioning on its own. What actually creates change is consistency over an extended period, months rather than weeks, during which both partners keep choosing the harder, less automatic response often enough that it eventually becomes the new automatic one. This is genuinely difficult, and it is also genuinely possible, which is a distinction worth holding on to when the process feels slower than either partner would like. If both people are willing to do this work, and it genuinely is work, not a one-time conversation but an ongoing practice, the anxious-avoidant pairing can evolve into something stable, because both partners are essentially teaching each other through consistent, repeated experience that the fears driving their original patterns don't have to come true this time. The anxious partner learns that distance doesn't always mean abandonment. The avoidant partner learns that closeness doesn't always mean engulfment. That is not a quick fix, and it doesn't happen through insight alone. It happens through hundreds of small moments where each partner does the slightly uncomfortable thing instead of the automatic thing, until the automatic thing stops being automatic. One final thing worth naming, because it tends to get lost in conversations about this dynamic. Neither attachment style is the villain here, and neither one is doing anything wrong by having the nervous system they developed through circumstances they didn't choose. It is tempting, especially for the partner doing the anxious escalating, to frame the avoidant partner as withholding or emotionally unavailable in a blaming sense. And it is equally tempting, from the avoidant side, to frame the anxious partner as excessive or too demanding. Both framings miss what is actually happening, which is two people, each carrying an old survival strategy that made complete sense given where it came from, colliding in a way that activates both strategies simultaneously. Compassion for the mechanism in both directions tends to be far more productive than blame in either direction, because blame reinforces the exact defensiveness that keeps the cycle running, while compassion paired with real accountability for changing the pattern is what actually gives two people a path out of it together. If you recognized yourself or a relationship you've been in somewhere in this pattern, I want you to know that recognizing the pattern is genuinely the hardest part, and also the part most people never get to, because the intensity of the dynamic itself tends to keep people focused on managing the immediate pain rather than stepping back to see the shape of the whole cycle. Most people live inside this dynamic for years without ever getting the distance needed to see it as a pattern at all, experiencing each cycle as a fresh, isolated crisis rather than the repeating structure it actually is. The fact that you can now name it in your own relationship or in one from your past is genuinely the difference between being caught inside a cycle and having enough perspective to eventually change your relationship to it. There's one more layer to this worth mentioning, because it explains why this dynamic can be so hard to walk away from even once you've intellectually understood it. Both partners in this pairing often describe the relationship, even in its most painful stretches, as the most intense and meaningful connection they've experienced. And that description is not delusion. The nervous system genuinely registers this specific combination of closeness and uncertainty as significant, because significance and intensity get processed through overlapping neurological channels. This is part of why people in this dynamic often struggle to be convinced that a calmer, more secure relationship could ever feel as deep, because their entire emotional vocabulary for depth was built around this particular flavor of intensity. Recognizing this doesn't mean the feelings weren't real. It means the feelings were real and also potentially misleading about what actually predicts a relationship's long-term health, which are two things that can both be true at once. It is also worth naming what tends to happen when only one partner does the work described here, while the other continues operating purely on the old pattern. This is a genuinely common scenario, and it produces a specific, frustrating outcome. The partner doing the work often experiences real personal growth, becoming calmer, less reactive, more able to tolerate their own attachment style's discomfort, while the relationship itself may not improve nearly as much as that individual growth would suggest. Because a cycle by definition requires both halves to keep running. This isn't a reason to avoid doing your own individual work regardless of what a partner does, because that work benefits you in every relationship going forward, not just the current one. But it is a reason to be honest with yourself about whether a partner is actually engaging with their half of the pattern too, rather than assuming that your own progress alone will eventually be enough to change the whole system by itself. One practical note before we close, because I think it matters for anyone watching this and recognizing themselves as the anxious partner specifically. Self-soothing during a partner's withdrawal is not the same thing as suppressing your needs or pretending distance doesn't affect you. It means building enough internal stability, often through your own support system, your own sense of identity outside the relationship, and sometimes through working with a therapist on your own attachment history, that you are not entirely dependent on your partner's consistent presence to feel okay. This is not about needing your partner less in some cold, detached sense. It is about needing them from a place of wanting rather than a place of desperation, because desperation is exactly what tends to trigger the avoidant withdrawal further, while wanting, expressed calmly, tends to invite the avoidant partner back in rather than pushing them away. There is a similarly practical note worth offering to anyone recognizing themselves as the avoidant partner. Staying present during closeness does not mean forcing an intensity of emotional expression that feels foreign or performative. It means simply not disappearing, sending a short message even when the instinct is to go silent entirely, naming the need for space directly, instead of just taking it without explanation. These are small, almost unremarkable acts of communication, and that is exactly why they work so well, because they don't require you to become a fundamentally different kind of person overnight. They just require enough conscious effort. In the specific moments the old pattern would normally take over automatically, to give your partner real information instead of an unexplained absence for them to fill in with their own worst fears. That perspective alone, even before any behavior changes, tends to reduce the intensity of the cycle, simply because naming a pattern in real time changes your relationship to it, giving you a moment of choice, where before there was only automatic reaction. Next week, we're talking about something related but different. Why some people struggle to receive love even when they consciously want it more than anything, which is often the deeper root underneath both anxious and avoidant patterns. Subscribe to Heartnest so you catch it.